I'm here to hang. I'm here to see what you all are up to. What's going on? What's going on in parts north?
I think the students are going to introduce themselves to you first.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Do I go first? Yeah.
I guess so.
Hello, good afternoon, Trish. My name is Matthew, and I came to this program because I was teaching before, but I wanted to make better educational resources for my students, and so this program attracted me due to the technology part of it, that I could combine like modern technologies and teaching methods to kind of create engaging learning experiences. And so that's what I want to get into in the future.
Thank you for that, Matthew. So what grade levels do you teach at, or what?
I've taught pretty much every grade. I started teaching at elementary schools in France, and then I also taught at high school level before I came here. So it's pretty much all age groups, and in between I was teaching adults. So I was teaching English as a second language, and kind of flipped from school to school, and kind of got a little taste of everything.
So a really broad range there.
Yes, but
Cool.
not really specialized, shall we say. but yeah, dip my finger in many
Have you
pies.
found much? I'm sorry.
I dip my finger in many pies.
Yeah, so it sounds like it. No, that's good. That's a lot of broad experience. Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, I am Zainor. I guess what I could say about myself is that I have a background in communication studies, so I did 4 years of that as my undergrad. And what brought me to this program was just an interest in using the skills I had acquired in communications with merging that with my interest in education. I wasn't sure where it was going to bring me in. As I progressed through this program, I found that my main interests are in game-based learning and gamification.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And it's interesting because I'm simultaneously, I see the good in it and also the overuse and bad in it. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to hear a little bit about how, maybe what your thoughts are around that, and in link with like AR, VR, all that stuff, because that's kind of the direction I see it going in right now.
Yeah, definitely, because we're starting to see a lot of that in a whole bunch of different domains and a whole bunch of different contexts. Not just the gamification side, but like you said, the AR and the VR side. And yeah, cool. We can get into that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Salvatore. Originally, after college, I was in the tech industry and startups out in the Bay Area, and then I switched over and became a teacher and taught secondary for 7 years before coming into this program. And what really brought me here was my interest in, or rather my concern about how tech is implemented in the classroom, and the concern that it's distributed unequally within kind of from district to district, and trying to work as an intermediary between that implementation and trying to ensure in some ways that there's some fairness in that distribution. So that was what kind of brought me here, and I've been learning a lot of different things that maybe don't necessarily kind of fill all the needs, but I'm learning a lot of other skills, and I'm trying to see how I can utilize them in that process.
Excellent. So you just made me think of, and something to consider, because there's probably some good models and approaches there just off the top of my head. So that whole idea of a digital divide, like you were just saying, and with the new technology that's coming out, we went through that in the 1990s. I mean, so in the first wave of computer automation, there were big initiatives and, of course, big concerns that it would cause unfair advantage, right? So, in this idea of democratizing education around the world and just making that a level playing field, that everybody has equal access. That started in the 1990s and has, continued in a number of different ways. So if you go back and take a look at some of the things, and I'm thinking about in particular, like organizations like Apple and Microsoft led huge initiatives in partnership with different hardware companies like Dell and Gateway Computers back then, and I'm talking from the U.S. frame because I lived it, but just taking a look at going back in that kind of the literature and seeing how approaches that were used could be things that could be used now. But there's a lot more people that are involved and a lot more countries that are involved now too. There's actually an X Prize for education. Do you guys know that there's an X Prize for education? Yeah. And that's essentially it. That's the goal, is to democratize education around the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. We were talking about it in our ISD class the other night, and someone brought up the fact that they were looking at a different country where students have very little access to internet. But then I brought up the fact that you go to the Bay Area and you go to Oakland and you go to a school and they have no access to internet in some places there too, and then you go across the bay and they have everything in the world. So it's happening in even the most developed places where you have this divide. So that's just a concern of mine.
Yes, we had it here so I'm in the state of Illinois, just outside of Chicago, but just north of us in the state of Wisconsin. Again, I remember in the 1990s that there was a huge initiative. There was government funding that was distributed out through the public libraries, and it was to bring bandwidth. It was to work neighborhood by neighborhood, county by county, in order to bring the schools up onto basically a statewide infrastructure. So yeah, that's been a big deal for a while. But you're right, there's this disparity that continues, and what needs to happen in order to close those gaps. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
Hello, Trish. My name is Erica. I have a background in education and human resources management. In general, I'm very interested in performance management. So what brought me to this program was the interest in using technologies to help people develop their competencies and apply them to later make a good impact on their school or organizations.
Very nice. Have you looked at any of the stuff that's come out now with portable credentials? Like being able to take your transcripts, if you, we can get our transcripts from school. We have an expectation that we can, contact the school and be able to get our transcripts and be able to submit them to other schools for continued education, or submit them to an employer in order to, provide evidence of qualifications. But there are also a lot of portable qualifications and portable competencies initiatives that are happening now, a lot of times with government agencies. I would be surprised if it wasn't happening with workforce development in Canada. But you can take a look at we have a project here in the States with the U.S. Department of Labor, and I want to say it's called Cassiopeia. But let me take a look for you. I can find it, but it's, how do we have this centralized kind of registration system so that people can take those skills with them? And that's going to become even more and more important as we move away from jobs and full-time work and more to skills and project work. So when you talk about performance management, do you also mean feedback loops, like people being able to get ongoing feedback for their own improvement?
Yes, absolutely. I talk about the moment of onboarding until the moment of the exit. I want to know what happens in between, because sometimes people, and I have lived this, you have a performance review, let's call it that way, and then it's only about your boss telling you all the things you did wrong. So there's many ways you can use technology or even to train your trainers and your employers to give positive feedback or constructive feedback. And I see that's not being implemented in the industry as far as I know. So having the tool that you mentioned, Cassiopeia, with core competencies would really help the training and development departments to help train employers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because one of the other gaps that I see is that we often, in the recruiting process for organizations, we get all of this great data and information about the different candidates, and then we make someone an offer, and that, somebody accepts, and then they onboard, and then it's almost like all of that information that we had that we collected during the recruiting process is just like, poof, gone. When that could actually be used as input into a development plan and be able to jumpstart that process so that you're walking in the door. And then not just from the organization's point of view, but from that person's point of view, because that's, if we take money off the table, right? If people feel like they're fairly compensated and that they're getting, at or better than market, competitive rates, the very next thing that we want to know is this organization going to help me develop my skills and help me move in my career growth? So what better tool than to, walk in the door and be like, we're committed to developing you and your future. Here's all this cool stuff that we collected as part of this process. We're going to start you with a development plan right off the bat that you can at least respond to,
Yes, some companies don't even have a succession plan and don't even know what that is. So that'll be an important part of the
Yeah, there's some big stuff going on there, and we'll talk more today too if you guys want to. This will be like this. There's some new stuff that I'm working on. That's how do we take data out of the operating environment in order to provide automated, fast feedback when people need it at the moment of need, how they want it, relevant to whatever they're working on, and personalized for them. That's the next wave of what's coming. And that's coming really soon, I'd say in the next 18 months. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you.
Hi, Trish. I'm Carla.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. So I have a bachelor's in education. I taught elementary, grade 5 and 6 for about a year. And I also do a lot of online teaching. So I kind of chose this program because I want to learn how to bring learning online and kind of give people access to learning new skills at their own convenience. I'm like really fascinated by that.
So sorry, say again, you want to learn how to do what online with the online system? Oh, okay. Like on demand. So you've done a lot of like virtual instructor-led synchronous facilitation. So live in front of an audience.
Yeah, well, usually it'll be like maximum 4 students, but for the most part, it's like individual tutoring through a tutoring center. So I help them with their work and review concepts with them. So
Nice.
I'm really interested in that aspect of e-learning.
Okay, so going deeper in that, do you also have an interest in doing more of the on-demand stuff, like being able to, so like really doing like more blended where perhaps there's pre-work or materials that people can access? Yeah. Do you do any of that now? No, okay. So it's been mostly the one-on-one or small groups. Oh, very nice. So just thinking real quick, so a year from now, you and I have this conversation again. What would have happened that would have been exciting in this space for you that you would have experienced or been able to do? So a year from now, you and I have a follow-up conversation. What would have happened in that space that would get you excited? Like you'd be telling me like, oh, Trish, wow, we talked in October of 2018 and here's all the cool stuff that's happened.
Internship by then.
What's that?
I'm hoping to start my internship by then.
Oh, okay. And what would that look like? Would that be for school or?
I'm not sure. I have no idea. I'm hoping to throw myself in whatever is offered to me and do the best that I can to take as much in, and learn as much as I can.
Okay. All right. Well, we might circle back. Well, everybody be on deck for that question because we'll see if we can circle back. I'm going to ask that one again of everyone in the room later on in the call. How's that? Thank you. All right, cool. You're everybody's on notice.
That's not fair.
Hi Trish, I'm Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
So this is my first semester in the program, and I really have very limited experience in it. My undergrad was in psychology,
Okay.
and my professional experience has basically all been in social media and marketing and communications. So I'm really coming from a background that's kind of all over the place, but not exactly focused on education, although there is the technology component for sure. But so far, from what I've been exploring in my classes and through some research, I think I'm heading in the direction of kind of like a user experience designer, because that seems to be where my strengths lie so far, that at least I've discovered to this point. So yeah, that's what I'm sort of approaching now and working towards, and who knows what's going to happen in the future, but that's where I am right now.
Very nice, Jennifer. So what attracts you? So what attracts you to the technology? You're attracted to the technology, I would assume.
I think it comes from partially just being like a gamer from when I was really young and growing up with that, and sort of finding like a niche that there were at the time wasn't a whole lot of girl gamers, and so hanging out with a lot of boys and learning about all the technology behind it, and then of course with social media blowing up when I was like in high school, MySpace, that kind of stuff. So I think it's come from that kind of point, you know, like exploring it through the hobby side, and then it's kind of just incorporated itself into what I do every day.
Nice. I like that. What is it about the people side that attracts you? Because it seems to be that there's a pairing there. Would you like the technology if it didn't have a people component to it?
Possibly, because I
Yeah.
really do like technology. I've done a little bit of coding and that kind of stuff too. So I do like both aspects. There's the component of people that I like is that people are unknowns, and learning how they work is very interesting to me, because no two people work exactly the same. So finding out what makes each person different and what makes them who they actually are as opposed to the person next to me, that's what's really interesting.
Wow, Jennifer. So another area you might take a look at if you haven't already is human computer design, human computer interaction, HCI, and that interplay between, because I don't know if you all know this, but computers were the first appliance that we've had as humans where they actually make us feel bad about ourselves. And there's a whole body of work on that psychology, because before we had computers in the workplace and had computers in the home, and still, I mean, I don't walk up to my laundry machine and when it doesn't wash the clothes properly, I don't go, wow, well, I'm a terrible person and it must be user error and there's no way I'm ever going to learn how to use this appliance. I get mad and kick the machine and call a service technician, right? But think about when something goes wrong with one of these devices, we actually, oftentimes as humans, we actually blame ourselves. So it's really interesting how these devices, they're just appliances, really, like anything else, but they're changing that interplay. They're changing our interaction with them and our interaction with each other. And there's a whole space there, too, that might be interesting to explore.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi Trish, my name is Sami. This is my final semester. I have a background in architecture.
I'm sorry, say
I have
again.
a background in architecture,
Okay.
and what brought me to this master's degree is like some attempts that I tried back days with instructing and leading learning environments back in Turkey, with dealing with Syrian refugees school. Actually, I did like a couple of workshops. It was like about promoting for like future career for like students. And after those workshops finished, that I found myself that I lacked the academic background that will strengthen my attempts or my initiatives. And through the courses also, I found that my experience with the design back in architecture school gave me a lot of assets to add. And also through the masters, I keep thinking about with the affordability of the technology, how can I use it in the poor areas and in the places that have crisis. So generally speaking, yeah.
That thing is working.
Generally speaking, maybe using affordable tablets and giving the students the opportunity to start using open educational resources rather than textbooks. And also, I heard about another attempts in those refugee schools to start using basic programming skills like the Scratch. So I think those both opportunity, it's going it's interesting me now for that moment.
Okay. And so then you've been both practitioner and facilitating, but then am I remembering correctly that also in a leadership role and being able to lead a learning organization, is that also part of your?
So hi, my name is Catherine. My bachelor's in geography, and what led me into this program was the way that geography is being taught in university and also in grade school is kind of bland. Because geography is a very, you can travel different worlds, you can see different way mountains are formed, but right now the way they teach you is through maps and these little lines, and you kind of have to visualize yourself. So that led me to be interested in augmented reality and VR, in which you can actually see it and be present in it. So that's what drew me to this program.
Wow. So what would that look like for you? If you had a tool that would be really your ultimate way of being able to teach so that people could really interact. So it wouldn't be flat, right? It wouldn't be just a two-dimensional. What would be a really interesting way or an ideal way of being able to teach that if you could have it any way that you wanted?
If we had any technology, I think the best was if you have a class kind of like this, and you can project augmented reality in the middle. You can show mountain forms or countries and stuff so that people can interact and turn the thing again, actually play around with it. Because virtual reality is kind of more your secluded, I guess, in your own real world, but with augmented reality, everything you can put. So that would be what it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's very interesting because there's a lot of VR talk right now. It's just hot, and it's the cool thing. But AR is the one that's going to overtake it, and for exactly the reason of what you're saying, and that is you can be in the physical environment and have the data overlay, right? And then what we're going to see, and actually sooner than we know, is not just the data overlay without having to wear the Iron Man, helmet and being able to see, that, but a data overlay of just being able to walk around in our environment, and there's going to be things glimmering on. It'll look like a computer game. We'll walk up to physical objects and physical people, and there'll be, some kind of indication or oral indication in the air that tells us that there's, information there or data to be had, or, and it'll be frictionless is the big word that's going around. I don't know if you saw it. So Microsoft has the HoloLens. Have you seen anything that they've been doing with that? That might be an interesting application. The other one is, and I'm trying now to think of who just did it, but they're bringing in tactile sensation now, right? So we talk about has anybody in the room been to a 4D movie yet? So I saw the movie, I was in Dubai and they have 4D movie theaters. And when I walked in with my father-in-law, I was like, wait a minute, because we're Americans, but we're holding popcorn and a big Coke. And then I'm looking at, our seats in this movie theater. We were there to see, what was the movie with Sandra Bullock and the handsome guy? Well, the women my age think he's really handsome. The guy who just got married, nobody thought he'd get married. Why can't I think of his name? Nadia, help, help. Clooney, yes, Gravity. So we walk in, we've got the popcorn and the Coke, and the chairs are on mechanisms to move you around while you're in the theater.
I honestly found it so overwhelming. It was like too much for me.
Really?
Yeah. It vibrated so much. Like the whole movie theater was vibrating. There's only 2 rows of seats that had it. And it like freaked me out a bit. I never did it again after.
Yeah, well, it's so funny that you should say that, because I was sitting there and I was looking at the, the hydraulics that they had on the chairs before the movie even started, and I was like, we shouldn't have gotten this Coke. Like, we're gonna wear it. Like, this is terrible. So, but that kind of experience of now bringing in more of the senses, but without having to do it with all of that hardware, somebody just came up with. I'll think about it and I'll tweet it. But it's basically using puffs of air to give physical sensation. So we know with haptic feedback with VR right now, you can have on the headset and you can have the handsets that actually, if you're moving around in the virtual environment and you go to pick something up, how do you mimic that sensation so that people feel like they're actually holding something and it's got substance and it's got weight to it. This is starting to move us in that direction, but they're manipulating the air so that you don't have to hold a controller per se. It's more kind of organic. And that would be interesting in some of the landscapes, I think, that you're talking about, to actually have that experience of what being in that environment would be. Yeah, thank you. One last thing on that, though. They've just started to do it here on the news. Some of the storms that we've had, some of the hurricanes that we've had, and the weather centers now on the news channel, some of them, I have chills. So instead of like seeing the weather person with the map of the clouds and, the radar behind him or her, they're actually doing like, this is what it would be like to be out on the street right now in the middle of this hurricane and the water rising. So that, we're starting to get those types of technologies that are engaging more senses so that it becomes more compelling. And is that what you want? Something that's more compelling? Yeah, nice. Thank you. Awesome.
Just on that note, Trish, I don't know if you've ever heard of Birdly, the virtual reality flying simulation. It actually has a fan on the front of it so that it's blowing wind on your face, and it really tricks you. That extra sensation really tricks you into think you're actually flying. It's quite amazing. That's something so simple. And it's like, wow, I'm flying over New York City right now.
Yeah, because our brains know no difference. Our brains know no difference than, from rehearsal to the actual what's happening in the environment. And so engaging those senses like that gives us that kind of depth, right? That kind of, it's kind of cool and kind of freaky scary. Hello.
Can you hear me?
A little, maybe a little better. Wait. Yes, excellent. Yeah, and it's the big pod. Yeah, the big pod. Yeah. America?
Yeah, it's me, America.
Well, they made you work hard for that.
Okay, so I'm an elementary teacher, and I'm interested in like non-traditional teaching spaces, and the idea of the learning, like what learning happens in unstructured environments, and I'd like to eventually work towards working in one of those environments. So I like the potential for tech and design in designing the spaces, designing the experiences for the children, and then the children designing their own experiences and spaces, and just the way that all comes together really nicely.
And I found that this program has given me lots of really great ideas and the tools to make that happen. So I'm really happy. 2 semesters in.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming.
And what ages? I'm sorry.
Thank you for coming also.
No, thank you. No, thanks for bringing me in and having this conversation. This is fun for me. So, what ages do you like to teach?
Elementary, so maybe like 5 to 12 or thereabouts.
Okay. And what do you wish for the kids? Like what do you wish that the children could experience together with you in that environment that would have positive effects on them?
Well, like less homework, less tests, more time to explore anything that they want. So I don't have a specific like vision, but just the idea that if like a kid walks in and is like, I want to learn about rockets today, like we could do that and we could make that happen.
Right.
Whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
It's not a specific vision that I have, but just an atmosphere that I'd like to.
Right, and I love it, so that you're inspiring their curiosity and that exploration and that learning is fun, and that to encourage them to be inquisitive, because I know here in the States there's a lot of concern, and certainly has been my experience in some domains that we're shutting that down, right? So right at the time that we need that, those creative, critical thinking skills and that kind of no fear, we're putting them sort of in the opposite kind of environment. There's a school in Dubai that I did a little bit of work with that has kids from infant up through kindergarten. So it's infant, so straight up childcare, pre-K, and then into kindergarten. And the thing that we were talking with them about, and they have that kind of immersive environment like you're describing. So the actual school building is that each of the rooms inside the building is actually very much set up to be set up for different types of instructional and informational and social activities. So they go into, so instead of like kind of rotating for different subjects, they rotate into different physical spaces to experience different things. And 2 things that were really cool about that. One was their timeout room. What they realized is a timeout room. And and again, I think about like my own experiences with this. If you had to settle down, or you were getting out of hand, or there was, somebody felt there was some kind of disciplinary action, and that's what it was always for, right? You went to timeout because you were bad, you misbehaved or whatever. And timeout would be like a chair, turned around with your back to people, staring at a wall. Well, this timeout room, it's not because the child was necessarily misbehaving or disciplinary action or whatever, but it was really there to help facilitate the child being able to learn how to soothe him or herself. And the room was really cool. It was this nice room. You could sit in the room, you could lie down in the room. It was, the lighting was set to be really low key, and it had stars on the walls, like it was, meant to be like the galaxy. But the interesting thing in it was, there were lots of interesting things in it, but they had a lava lamp. And it was meant to and what they realized was that the kids get overstimulated, right? And they're not able to cope yet. They haven't learned I feel these sensations in my body. I don't know how else to deal with them or express them in any kind of meaningful way. And I need an area that I can go to that's safe, that I don't feel like, there's all this stuff, kind of like too much going on and I can't process it. And it became, so that was interesting, the way that it's positioned like that. But the thing that we were there to speak with them about was the kids after a certain age, I think over the age of 3, they start being able to interact with these large TVs that are interactive screens with educational material. And what they wanted to be able to do was to actually create a digital docent that would actually help teach the kids resilience and coping skills. And that it would do it in such a way that it would use AI technology. We talk a lot in artificial intelligence about cognitive computing, but there's so much that's happening in affective computing, right? So the emotional side. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to leverage artificial intelligence to basically detect things, observable things that were happening with the child, non-invasive things from the screen with the child interacting, to be able to tell what was potentially happening or what emotion that child or sensation that child was experiencing. And then using the digital docent to provide not only some immediate intervention to help that child connect, but then also provide some feedback to the facilitators and the instructors so that they could, because one of the big things that they knew that they had was we as adults tend to look at a child that's behaving in a certain way and we have our own narrative in our heads. We tell a story about what that child's doing. That child's not listening to me. That child's defying me. That child is, that child is whatever. And then we also have an opinion of that child going forward. So how do we use technology, especially AI technology, in a way that would intermediate that? Cool? Yeah, I can send you some information. Let me also talk to, I know the head of the school, happy to see if she's interested in a connection. I think she would be. I think she'd be very interested in this program. So they haven't implemented anything with the resilience yet, but that's where they're heading, is in that kind of a progressive way. A last thing too, with World Expo 2020 in Dubai. So we often think about big events like the Olympics, or we think about some other big events that we have that draw a lot of tourists. And Expo 2020, the World Expo is something that happens every 5 years. And the last one was in 2015. It was in Milan in Italy. And so this next one, 2020, is in Dubai. There's all kinds of press on everything that Dubai has been doing in order to prepare for this. But there was actually a donation for a happiness building to be built for World Expo 2020 in Dubai for children only. And it's to bring children into a safe environment and to teach them happiness skills on what it means to be happy, what it means to be happy individually, and what it means to be happy together. So that's one of the things that's happening. You can look that up, the happiness initiative that's happening all around Dubai. But then there's a specific thing that's happening for children in that building for 2020. Yeah, all kinds of cool stuff happening with kids. Oh, and actually, and since so many of you are elementary school, have an elementary school background or having an interest in children, the other one that I should remind or think of is Dan Brule. So his last name is Brule, and Dan is known around the world for his work with breath. And he just partnered with school systems in the south of France in order to teach children breathing techniques through musical instruments. So they're kind of tricking the kids into learning how to breathe properly, because we never learn how to do that. No one has really taught us. And it's so critical, right? So if we don't oxygenate our bodies and oxygenate our brains, then we have all sorts of physical and mental and emotional challenges because we're just not getting what we need. We breathe too shallow. And so they're like, okay, well, these kids are playing these musical instruments. They want to be able to, blow the horns better or do whatever. So they're teaching them these breathing techniques so that the kids learn how to breathe as part of playing a musical instrument. So all sorts of interesting things happening in education around the world, especially with kids. And I'd like to see more of it with adults. Those puppies grow up into dogs, right? Like, we need those skills too.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, thank you.
No, you can leave it there. I think you can hear me okay, Trish?
Yeah.
All right. So my name's JP. I also just started the program, so I'm pretty green and I'm pretty impressionable. But I can tell you about what attracted me to the actual degree here at Concordia was that it did not take me very long to realize I'm not a very good high school teacher. I'm not a fan of classroom management as part of my job, so that didn't really agree with me. But I mean, not to be all negative about it, it's that going through that experience helped me realize that I was more interested in instructional design and content creation. So for me, being in this program and so early on, especially from already listening to your responses to everyone else here, it's clear, if not now, then every other day that I'm also here, that there's so many different directions to go in that I don't think I can give as concrete of a this is what I'm interested in, because I've just heard about everything, and I'm at that point where I'm constantly looking out the window thinking like, oh, I could work, yeah, no, I can see myself working on that. So that's kind of like the flux that I have going on right now. But I do share your passion for wanting to see like newer techniques and more innovation in the realm of like adult training. I think I deal better with adult andragogy as opposed to pedagogy a little bit, and sometimes even it's interesting to watch how even the smallest change to like a training or educational setting from what was previously conventional can sometimes have like massive changes. So yeah, I'm just really interested to hear about like your thoughts on adult training and how what are the big waves, I suppose, in the industry right now. So
Say that last piece one more time, JP, because it kind of got cut off.
I'm just interested I'm interested in like the sort of like big sort of sea changes in adult training right now. So
Okay, what would you like to see in adult training?
I think I understand it as I'm still working on having the same generalizations I think a lot of people can have about like what the corporate world is like, and it's difficult to have that kind of exposure. I know some companies might try to innovate how they train or orient people to a position, let alone a company. And I'll hear like interesting stories here or there, but there's no one uniform way it's being approached. I think it's just I still understand it as like it was like you were saying earlier in this talk today and in the introductions that let's say in the recruitment process you get this kind of information, it gets collected, and as soon as someone's hired, that information is thrown out the window, and it could potentially be used maybe through like a little bit of augmented intelligence could like use that information to like personalize that employee's experience, and it doesn't require like a helicopter manager to keep an eye on them all the time. It's more about how the information you collect on them and their personality could actually help a sort of like employer-employee basis, you know? Yeah, but I mean, like, this is the thing. I could just sort of like, I feel like I could just sort of ramble on forever about like interesting ideas and things like that. I think I'm still at that stage where I'm trying to like find my place in all this. So that's where.
No, that's cool. Well, then this is the place to be, right? To be a sponge and soak it all up and spend that time just staring out the window and going, "Oh, that was an interesting thought. Well, that's curious. Oh, maybe I'll do that Tuesday." That's a great place to be. But we have mimicked in the education. So corporate training is very much like academia because that's where it takes its roots, right? So, but that's true. So one of the things that we're finding in corporate training is that people are resistant to some of the new technologies and the new modalities because they don't think it's training, and then they feel like they're being denied something that they need for their jobs or that they need in order to be able to progress. And the underlying factor that we found in that is that people perceive training to be, they recognize training or what they think of as training when it mirrors whatever their academic experience was. So people my age, in my generation, there are a lot of people my age and older that they are, they're uneasy unless you bring them into a classroom environment and have them sit on their hands and, there's somebody in the front of the room who has authority and you're just there to listen in a very passive way and soak it up. And when that person gets done speaking, like, class is over, like, and when you take that away from them, it's Maslow. You're actually violating their sense of trust and their sense of safety because they don't feel like they, if you take them into some kind of an immersive environment, it's not just, the kids these days or whatever. It's they really feel like you're not providing them what they perceive as the thing that they need. So that's been really interesting to work in those shifts with adults, is how to help people be able to connect with and emotionally be open to these different types of modalities in a way that makes it okay for them to try it so that we can enhance their learning. But it's a really critical component. I was up in front of, so we have Discover Financial Services. So Discover Cards, it's a credit card. And this was a few years ago. I was up in front of 200 project managers, and I was there I was doing an opening keynote. They were doing an education conference, and I got on stage, and the very first thing that I did was I violated Maslow right off the bat, completely by accident. So I went to facilitate an activity that was a group activity, and I was going to have them. So here you got 200 project managers. These are people that are used to working, pretty much in isolation from each other. The first time that they're really like hanging out in a room together, the first thing I do as a facilitator is come out on the stage and try and get them to do a group activity with each other in front of each other. That was such a violation of safety in the room that it was like the whole room just stopped. So in thinking about those things, as we move to break down that command and control environment, we need to have an understanding and appreciation of how we also need to help people that have had other experiences reconnect with or connect with these new experiences before we can set an expectation that they're not only going to be able to function, but that they're going to appreciate what it is that we're trying to do. And you'll run into a lot of resistance with that. So I was very lucky. I was very lucky on that stage to realize, and I was like, oh, you just totally, just like everybody in here was like, I am not going to do these things in front of other people. And I changed the activity that I gave them and then warmed up the room, and they were able to do things together later on, but I gave them an individual activity first.
I think maybe I just have a bit of a follow-up question about that because this is speculation and all. This is entirely speculation on my point, but I guess that sort of like resistance that you were starting to feel is not entirely all that different from like what a high school teacher or an elementary teacher can experience doing certain things. But I kind of take your anecdote as being like that is a generational divide because I'm presuming that like the project managers who you were trying to engage with in an activity that could be found in a middle school or a high school or an elementary level school, that wasn't reflective of the kind of schooling they might have received when they were children. And I feel like that's kind of like, that's something that's happening right now is that people are trying to use a more, the student-centered classroom is becoming much more common now that I think maybe a entire room full of project managers 50 years from now probably wouldn't have as many difficulties with performing in front of each other or being able to like interact with each other on a more personal level. Like maybe they were just used to, it's like you were saying that it is a very big generational divide where people are used to rote memorization and they're used to being told how to engage with the material in front of them as opposed to like having any sort of room for creativity. I mean, like I'm sure all of us have watched TED Talks on like Ken Robinson or Sugata Mitra, and these are like new ideas that haven't even been fully applied yet to the educational system. They're still sort of even floating around as full, like a potentially adoptable philosophy, not something that's like ingrained in us yet.
Absolutely, and you're right. So then we're going to get these. You're absolutely right. So there's definitely a generational divide there because they didn't recognize what was happening. But then there's also as a facilitator or as an instructional designer to have that appreciation of knowing your audience in that kind of way and things like that that might. So we design those types of programs or those types of activities for people regardless of age. But how do we then keep an appreciation and an attunement of how something novel might hit? Do you know what I mean? So how do we make sure that we're factoring in? I mean, there's like an anthropological, sociological aspect to this. It's not just about the instruction and the activity. And again, we do it with the best intent. Like we want the best for these audiences. But how do we also do it with an appreciation of, this is novel for this crowd. How are we going to manage? How are we going to make it okay for them to engage? Because the other thing that we know across all humans is you take a population of humans and people are going to conform to the social norm. And so your classroom and whatever delivery method that is a social norm. And so if they can see their peers, they're gonna, I'm I'm taking a cue from what's happening with you. And then how do we design for that? How do we design for that at any kind of level? And how do we leverage that? Is that helpful? Is that, yeah.
Interesting. I guess I take away from your answer that it's like, I think sometimes people shouldn't confuse that these kinds of efforts in any sort of industry involving education is not to have a sort of like one size fits all kind of approach, but that we're all trying to develop methods and methodologies that are more adaptable than anything else. It's not trying to like have like just a plug and play at all times. It's just supposed to be like you take the crowd in consideration, you develop the course, and the materials and the technologies that you're going to use are all supposed to be like part of the design process. It's not just like the course material.
You've got it. Yeah, absolutely. And then how do we help to socialize it, right? How do we help to, especially when it is that we're trying all this new stuff with any population, how do we help them? How do we help set the tone that it's okay, that that they're getting whatever they need, and that that they have permission in some way, or that we're making it safe for them to go ahead and try. Yeah. Nice. Thank you. Hello. Let's see if we can move the big pod closer. Erica, thank you. Oh, very nice. Oh, let's help. Yes.
Hello, my name is Ray. I'm the international student from China, and I have a variety of experience teaching Mandarin as second language because my bachelor degree is teaching Mandarin as a second language. So, yes, so I have lots of experience teaching Mandarin from the kids from different countries, and the barriers and the difficulty I encountered before it's because my background is in China, and our education system is totally different from the education system in Western country. So Chinese students are more obedient in the classroom, than the kids I teach here in Canada. So in technology is something I feel interesting that can be applied to the classroom and really engage the student in Canada, especially the kids from elementary schools or preschool. They feel very interested in animation or that kind of video things instead of like just focus on what the teaching is talking about in the classroom. So and also the other thing is in China the e-learning development it's getting more the e-learning things it's developing pretty well in China. So I heard from an employer from a Chinese school in Canada. He said he visited a school in Beijing. They all use virtual classroom that teach the kids from all around the world. So virtual classroom is like I stay in Canada, and then I can see my classmate from Canada that sitting next to me. So and the teachers probably from other countries as well, but they all seem to sitting in the same classroom and talking to each other. That kind of things that I never experienced before. But he told me that it's well developing in China right now. So I'm not sure whether I can get this kind of learning experience in Canada in these programs as well. It's one. And my question to you, because I know you have some kind of background in AI, artificial intelligence things. So I'm just wondering what instructional design will play a role in the development of artificial intelligence industry.
Wow. So awesome. No. Well, you sparked a bunch of things in my head. So when you were talking about being able to set up that environment where you have the Canadian students, the Chinese students, and then having an instructor from yet another country and being able to bring that together, I'd be very interested in that technology. I know a company that's looking for that right now. They're actually trying to train their client workforces on recruiting, and they often have like one instructor who is like in his or her office, and then have like 5 different people in different companies and different geographic locations, and that instructor is supposed to monitor what each of those 5 is doing. It sounds like that technology might be leveraged in that kind of way. So instead of it'd be like that one to many. So you made my head go in 5 million different directions there with that. I was thinking about the application as you were speaking. As far as the artificial intelligence is concerned, it's fascinating to me. It was actually, Michael, I think I was just tweeting with you about this, and that is that China's ahead as far as AI overall. And that includes with artificial intelligence in some aspects with education. And I'm trying to think of the name of the company, but do you know of the Chinese company now? It starts with an L, and it is now the #1 English as a second language education in the world. And it's all done with an AI tutor that facilitates the experience with each individual person, tailors that experience and that language learning. So the AI entity is teaching kids, or not just kids, it's teaching people English, but it's, again, personalizing and tailoring that experience to each individual. And right now they've got over 1 million students enrolled. It's far more than 1 million. It's like millions of people. Do you know what company I'm thinking of? So sorry. It's an educational company. It starts with an L. Yeah, with an L. I'll have to take a look. Hang on, we're having a little bit of a guest. I have well, he's not really a guest, but he's gonna sit over here and bother the mess out of me. I have an elderly cat. I hope no one's allergic. And since today is International Cat Day, he has decided. So I'm home for the first time in a long time, and Oz has decided that he is just not going to go sit somewhere quietly and leave me to having conversations with folks. Anyway, I'm so sorry for the interruption. But now that I have him in my lap, hopefully he'll quiet down a little bit, because if I close the door, he'll do bad things in the hallway. Such is the nature of being a cat person. So back to the program at hand. I think as far so that's the big thing with artificial intelligence, is being able to provide those types of experiences. So whether it's tutoring in a specific domain, such as providing instruction in helping people with language learning, or it's on any other kind of topic. But we're seeing artificial intelligence in a number of different applications. But the thing about it is they're all very specific. So they're very narrow in focus. So I've got a really good friend of mine. She actually she used artificial intelligence as a chatbot in order to coach salespeople for a medical device company on a new product after they went through product training. So picture this. You've got a bunch of adult salespeople, right? So these are highly competitive, very self-motivated. They are, they work for a medical device company. Medical device company comes out with a new device. And so they all come into a training environment in order to learn about that new product. And I believe it was about 2,000 of them. It was about 2,000 salespeople. So they come in and they go through training and they learn about that new product. And so at the end of the product training, or during the product training, they're asked to put together action plans. Like, what are you going to do in order to apply this to your work after training? And the action plans were set up to be executed against within 30 days. Like, here's me, I'm Trish. and I'm specifically making a commitment in my personal action plan, I'm going to do these things. So then, okay, traditionally, what would happen in that environment? So question for you, how would you keep up with 2,000 people to see if they're on task and doing their action plans? We can't, right? Or we'd have a tough, sorry?
If you conduct like e-learning things and use a robot to watch all the people, whether they are doing their things, doing their training things, I think if you can, like, if you connect the data, how much time they spend on the training and whether the quiz or exercise they finish on time and how much percentage they already get it right. So that kind of data can help to actually monitor the performance of the training.
We could definitely do that. You're absolutely right. And historically, we would have done something like that. We would have set up some sort of evaluation method that would be able to evaluate, in a particular system, whether that was in a learning system like an LMS, or whether that was in some kind of business system like, going into Salesforce.com or going into SAP or some kind of business software. We could monitor those types of actions. We could give them assessments, right? We could evaluate them. We could do focus groups. There are ways that we could capture that historically, but trying to keep tabs on 2,000 people and have an understanding, and at the same time be able to provide them with support, right? So where are they getting stuck? Where do they need more help? What would help clear barriers to success? All of that kind of stuff historically has not been scalable, right? We could do that for a small percentage of people if we knew who it was who needed the help, but probably not cost effective to do it for 2,000 people. And so what they did in this particular case was they offered it to 2,000 people because so everybody got it. And what they used was an artificial intelligence backed chatbot that they connected with on their phones. So they like to text. So just straight up, SMS texting, and the chatbot would prompt them. So the chatbot had intelligence built into it in terms of both information about the new product, but then also the chatbot had been trained with AI on a very, very proprietary coaching process. So the chatbot wasn't just, a one-way kind of like, a prompt, kind of a fancy prompt. It actually it actually has conversations with people and acts like a coach. It actually provides, it goes, okay, well, you're kind of stuck here. Here are some things to think about, and this might help move you forward. And then it also prompts to go, okay, well, where are you at with this? And what's fascinating about it is the people didn't mind that it was a chatbot. They didn't care that it was, it's this artificial entity. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people out of the 2,000 reported really liking it, even in some ways over a human coach at that point, because they felt like a human coach might judge them if they hadn't done something that they had intended to do at the time that they said that they were going to do it. So they didn't feel like the chatbot was going to have the same kind of bias or the same kind of prejudice or the same kind of judgy that a human might have. And then, of course, what they were able to do is these interactions that people would have in natural language with this AI-driven chatbot, they were able to analyze on the back end and figure out very, very quickly, using AI for the analytics, they could rapidly have an understanding of where, as a cohort, a large percentage of people were having challenges, and then be able to help clear those barriers. Like, was there, one of the things that came up was there was a misunderstanding about one of the product features, right? That just seemed to be, people as a whole seemed to have heard it wrong or gotten it wrong. And so they knew that they needed to kind of get ahead of that information. So you've got that two-way dialogue of being able to get a sense of providing support to the people, but then also being able to use it as a feedback loop to have an understanding just about real time where your people are at and what other things you might do in order to help them kind of move along. So that's one very specific application of AI.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'll look into it. If I can go into the internet, I can search more information about what you talk about. Yeah, and see whether I can apply what you talk about into the classroom current.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's in the same kind of thing. Like, could you use a technology like that? So there are a number of them now. There's a number of different, and as a matter of fact, so Nadia, I'll make sure that there's a podcast about that particular business case, and how they did it. And that was actually out of Australia. So I'll send that over so that you can listen and get more details to that. But there are a number of those types of platforms now that you can license and leverage in order to be able to do those things. And they'll work on just about any communication protocol that you want. So it could be WhatsApp, or it could be WeChat, or it could be on Yammer, or it could be on Slack. It doesn't have to necessarily be on SMS text on the phone. It could be on Facebook Messenger as another opportunity, but you can design these things now, and there's different suppliers. But yeah, happy to provide some more details about what they did in that particular case. Yeah, you're welcome. A last thing while I'm thinking about it that you might all be interested in, just a little bit different. There's a platform out of China. They're a software company that I partner with, and they're called Umu. It's UMU, and UMU stands for you, me, and us. And it's a micro-learning platform. So it's a micro-learning platform, and they are very eager to actually, there's about 20,000 teachers in China right now who are using that platform for free with their students. And so Umu, the founder behind Umu, is Chinese and used to work for Google. And he's got quite a lot of passion for being able to democratize education around the world. And so that's a micro learning platform. So all of you in the education space, when it has to do with children anywhere in the world, Umu is a platform where they're interested in helping teachers better educate children. And so they're donating services and access to their technology for free.
Okay, I definitely look into the platform you talk about. Okay,
You're
thank you so
welcome.
much.
You're welcome. All kinds of cool stuff with that platform too. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I'm Nadine. My background is in teaching English as a second language to adults. So I've mostly taught in college, so international students and new immigrants. And for the last couple of years, I've been teaching online through the college, so asynchronously. Synchronously.
Yeah.
And that's where my interest in the program kind of stems from, because a lot of the content is poorly designed. So I want to see how I can create content that's more engaging for the learners, and really utilize all the tools that the software or technology has to offer. Because I feel like in the classes that I'm teaching, it's just pretty much, we're given the content, but it's pretty much PowerPoint slides that you can just read off, and there is no real engagement or anything that makes it interesting for the learners.
Interesting. So where are your students usually? Is there a particular population or country or nationality that you cater to, or? Oh, okay. So a technique that we've used before, this was So I got together with a longtime learning leader here in the States, Elaine Beek, and she actually led an initiative to document a bunch of activities. So we've got a couple of books out on Amazon that talk about leveraging technology for different types of activities. And here's one of the ones that I contributed that you don't need the book to necessarily get it. But if you want more activities like this, it's called active learning. And Elaine Beek, and Elaine's last name is Biech, and she curated all these different activities that you can do using different technologies from learning people around the world. So this was one that I contributed, and that is we often connect around food. So food is kind of a universal language, right? And that whole idea of human to human breaking bread together, right? Being able to sit around, whether we're sitting around a campfire or we're sitting around a kitchen table or we're sitting around a cafeteria or a dining hall. And so we can actually do quite a lot with a simple tool like Evernote. So with Evernote, we can set up a free account, and Evernote, we can set up a free folder on Evernote, a free notebook. And that notebook through Evernote can actually be assigned an email address. So you can do both, where people can actually email media into the Evernote notebook, and then people can also use a hyperlink to go and look at the contents of what's in that particular notebook online. And so what I've done in the past is, especially when it comes to words, we all have different mental models and filters over what a word might mean to us. So at the beginning of an activity, what I'll do in order to get people used to using the technology in a particular way is to have people send in photos that they found of their favorite kinds of food. And so then it's easy, it's low risk, it's non-threatening, you can't go wrong. I know where all the best photos of lasagna are, but I can contribute, so then you have everybody contribute, they can email, they can find, a photo from anywhere. You're not going to do anything with the photos other than people are going to look at it, but they can actually attach a photo to an email message, put a little message about why that's their favorite food in whatever language you want them to try. It could be even in English, or it could be, depending on what level you've got that class at, it could just be the photo and their name. And then everybody can submit that photo to the folder and then go into the folder and take a look at those images. And then there could be even just a conversation around the different types of food, because now it's normal language. Now you're talking about something that's safe to talk about, and you're using a medium that everybody, regardless of where they are in the world, if they've got internet connectivity, and if they're in an online class, and they probably have internet connectivity, and you could facilitate that real time so that people are interacting and looking in the folder and then also contributing in the classroom. And then you can move that activity to other words that other people might be having a challenge with. So then it could be like, we do this in corporate all the time. So in corporations, we might take an abstract concept like the word leader or leadership and ask people, we'll use an Evernote notebook in the same kind of way, and have people contribute, submit a photo of what being a leader or what leadership means to you. And then we go through and take a look at those photos and those different images. But that is really helpful in it can be really helpful in breaking down some boundaries and helping people to connect in safe kind of ways using, again, there's no fancy technology and it's free, but in a very, simple kind of straightforward kind of way. Is that helpful at all, or? You're like, you spent 20 minutes, Trish, with everybody else. And really, Evernote, that's the best you got for me? Really? Seriously? The other thing that I'm thinking about for you, too, is, have you played around with Duolingo at all? So do you know that they're the largest language learning company in the world now? Over 300 million? So here's an interesting thing about that. So I saw the head of engineering, a woman, actually present at the Amazon AWS Summit on their process for creating Duolingo training materials for their platform for a new language. And so when they get a new language in, they actually collect assets around that language and they process it first. They do the translation initially using Poly, which is the machine learning language artificial intelligence from Amazon AWS. So they actually process language first through artificial intelligence, and then they have a network of human volunteers around the world who then help to make sure that the nuance is there for making sure that the language is taught in a very much more natural kind of way. It's just an interesting process in how they do it.
I'm part of the, I get the emails for Hungarian, so to like verify the content.
Oh, nice. Have you participated?
Once or twice.
Oh, nice. Okay, so then you're familiar with what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, that combination of AI and human.
Yes, it really is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So hi Trish, we've talked a bit on Twitter, so it's nice to meet you in real life, if this counts as real life. I'm quite interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and as I asked you already, I'm really intimidated by the fact that I'm not a programmer and I'm not a coder, regardless of like my basic skills in programming. And you said that it's not necessarily a required thing, but would it benefit me to learn how to code and program properly, like to learn like Python or, for example, or like one of the more complex languages?
To what end?
To start my own artificial intelligence educational company. I mean, like with like the advances with the size of computers. I mean, I don't know how much you've been following the new NVIDIA processors, the Volta, I believe it's called, that allow like machine learning in the home, basically. I mean, that really opens up the doors to like you, me, and everyone else being able to run their own machine learning and collect huge amounts of data and do some really interesting things. So I don't, if you're doing a startup, I guess like resources are always a question. So hiring more people, if you could kind of be the jack of all trades, is that a good approach, or should we be more focused on teamwork and like gathering people around us and having like a strong?
I'm always in favor of playing to your strengths, and especially if, let's say that you were going to build your own educational technology company, then what is the piece of that fascinates you? Is it the business side and building the business out, or is it the tool side and the tech side? Because either way, you're going to need to have people around you that can complement those skills, because at a certain point, the tension of being the Jack or Jill of all trades is too much. You can't, there's no scalability in a person of one. But Michael, if you want to try, I mean, R and Python and that kind of stuff is cool to play around with. But if you want to really have an understanding of how to leverage AI right now, the platform I'm most familiar with the different artificial intelligence pieces is Amazon AWS. And so when we think of, AWS is Amazon Web Services. And people think of AWS as being just storage, like that's where you can put a whole bunch of stuff. But they actually have its artificial intelligence as a service. So you can do SaaS, so software as a service, but you can also do platform as a service, and you can also do infrastructure as a service now. So we no longer have to do what we have traditionally done, and that is build it on premise ourselves. And we also don't have to do it to the tune of like bazillions of dollars. So if you go out and play around with, they have, they have different artificial intelligence. So they've got language translation, they've got language transcription, they've got straight up machine learning. You could take, teacher assistant, yeah? You could take, scrub the data, right? Take all the identifying information out of it for your own purposes. But you could take data sets right now that you could go out to AWS for free to start with, for free, and you could use machine learning in order to process student data to figure out patterns in that data that are factors towards their exam scores or their study habits or whatever it is that that data represents. And you would learn more stuff from putting it through Amazon's AWS machine learning utility online, again, for $0 for nothing, than anything else. And that would start to give you an idea of some of the possibilities. But I would also play with some of the tools. Like I would play with, you can design Alexa skills for free. Voice first is where we're going. Accenture put out a report that, screen and mouse and keyboard gone by 2030, right? They're saying here, Alexa, so not just the Echo device that Alexa, the people think about with Alexa, but Alexa is now available on the Apple iWatch, and Alexa is being embedded as a technology in cars, and that's all AI driven and the natural language processing. They're saying here in the States that Alexa, more than 51% of American households will have an Alexa enabled device by 2021. So learning how to be able to create skills, looking at the different interfaces, and all of that right now is the wild, wild west, right? Like, so if you're looking for an inroad and like being kind of first to market up until, and now you can monetize all that. So I'll tell you what, do you have an Amazon account? Do you have like a regular Amazon account? Oh, look at you. What? Okay. Do you have any kind of an Alexa device?
I don't think so currently, unless my iPhone is one and I don't know it, but.
It won't be on your iPhone, but if you just even went out and bought a Dot, right? So a Dot is the small circular, to me it looks like a tuna fish can. If you got an Amazon Dot for like $49, $50 US, you could actually start to play with that thing. You can enable skills through your Amazon account on that device. And some of the skills that they have are interactive fiction. So when you guys were talking about, some of you were talking about games and gaming before, I mean, that's interactive fiction, right? But it's with fancy graphics and we get, juicy endings and we get to level up and do all that other kind of stuff. They have all of that you do strictly by voice. You can also now program like real Alexa skills, and you can also program skills that you're creating just for your device that you could use like with your own family, just in your own home. But then it gets you moving towards creating interactivity that happens like this, that happens with the voice enabled. And aside from paying that $50 for the Dot device, the rest of it is free.
That's pretty amazing. You're actually not the first person to bring up Amazon Web Services to me, so I should definitely check it out more in detail.
Yeah, you're welcome. I would start there. And the R and the Python and stuff like that, you can look at that, but that's so manually, unless you were like really digging on that kind of technology and you wanted to get into that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
So Trish, thank you for this really personalized answers to the children and to the students. I always say children because I have 3 kids, so I don't want to take more of your time because we're already like 90 minutes, but if you don't mind, maybe we can finish this with what's the future for our ISD. And like when we talked about we're moving from ISD to learning experience designers, and what should they expect?
Wow. Well, yeah. Thanks for panning the camera out. It was like, okay, going back to the group. So first of all, has this been helpful going around the room? Does it feel and getting some personalized attention? Are you also feeling good that I don't have time to go back and ask everybody what their aspirational goals are for a year from now? Okay. All right. That's a big question. The big thing is we're at an inflection point. I mean, it's probably not going to surprise some of you, especially not only after today maybe, but also some of you that have interacted on Twitter. I really feel like, when we look out a window today, we see the industrial age. We see version 1 of the industrial age. And I really feel like 2018 is the last year that we're going to have that environment. Things are so much going to change over the next 18 months. It's going to blow our minds, including our ability to be able to manipulate the physical world down to atomic level. And I mean, as individuals, like, I mean, it's crazy what's coming down the pike and the things that are going to happen. And they're like, wow, Trish Uhl just totally went off the deep end in the middle of this conversation. Like, what is happening here? But I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, that's a technology that's not just happening now, that's not just coming into play, it's maturing. So, you know, to give you an example, like, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, like, being able to manipulate our bodies, being able to manipulate our physical world. We're talking about, you know, the fourth industrial revolution, if you haven't heard that term before. If we think about how data and this data overlay is really going to provide a new dimension to the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact with things, the way that we interact with our physical space. We have technologies like last year, 2017 was the first year that we were able to store data onto a drop of water. Did you guys know that? We can store data like how much data on a drop of water? Like 1 million books, the content from 1 million books on one drop of water. So if we can imprint, if we can start to actually save data on a fluid medium, pun-ish intended, if we can save that kind of, and then what are our bodies made out of? Mostly what? Water. So we're doing this. You can look this stuff up. You know, so we're at this crazy inflection point as a species of, what keeps coming up for me is I keep trying to think of what it must have been like for people in the agriculture age who lived on farms and in farmland and had never seen a city before, to suddenly walk into a city for the first time and see buildings and see humans living together in that kind of way. Like, I think, can you imagine how startling that would be to somebody? Like, up until that point, you might have had a village that you would have seen, and a really large village would be like 150 people. Geez, you got 150 people that are like, you know, having a late lunch at the cafeteria right now. Like, we're used to being around, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people, being at a sports event, being in class, being on campus, being at a concert. We're used to having humans at the end of the agriculture age coming into the industrial age. They didn't have that kind of exposure to other people. They didn't, you know, this construct that we created called a city was brand new. That's the depth of the changes that are going to happen within the next 18 months. Like that, you know, so in addition to all this crazy stuff that's happening that we can leverage within the classroom, and that's why things can sometimes feel really disjointed, and for some people it's their anxiety is really high, even though they can't really put kind of a name on it, because everything just feels like we're in this flux of chaos. Have you experienced that? Do you know somebody or have felt that yourself, where there's just sort of this like hum of anxiety? Do you know what I mean?
I definitely feel it all the time. Yeah. I mean, I like to describe it as like I've heard it described as like the hockey stick, like we're right at the bend before it shoots straight up. Yeah. And a lot of people have said that about quite a few different technologies, and I don't think most people are ready for what is coming, like you said. I think it's going to be a gigantic shock as AI and technology permeate our bodies and our worlds all over. Like AR overlays over everything all the time with 5G internet is really going to be a...
Yes, Michael, I'm glad you brought that up. So 5G internet, and I don't mean like 5G from like an individual provider. I mean like 5G becomes like the infrastructure, you know, where everybody's on 5G throughout Canada and everybody's on 5G throughout the United States and throughout Mexico and all of North America. And it's just, that's the lightning strike. Like that is Frankenstein's monster coming to life. 5G as an infrastructure is 100 times faster than the bandwidth we have now. And Gartner, so the Gartner group is talking about, we're going to have Internet of Things Like we're going to go from 5.6 billion devices, and I don't mean our cell phones and our tablets. I mean like wearables and implants. We're going to go from it's 8.6 billion in our environment right now globally to over a conservative estimate is 26.6 billion by 2020. And some even say, it'll far exceed 50 billion devices. Like everywhere we literally go, we're going to have communications with the objects and the things. We're going to literally interact with them, and they're going to interact back with us. So when that happens, how does that change formal education and how does that change formal training? If I've got some device in my environment that can instruct me on its use and its procedural steps and how to use it and maintain it, and when we get into 4D printing, not 3D printing, we're beyond 3D printing, but we get into 4D printing, which is things being able to repair themselves. Like all of this stuff, like you just said, Michael, like we're right at that hockey stick. It's exponential from here. It's not linear. And so the big thing is, get excited about the technologies and get excited about the possibilities, but learn how to focus and learn how to get to the information that's going to help you as quickly as possible and learn how to cope. Those are, coping strategies as things continue to accelerate and being able to function in this world and not only yourself, but as champions in education, in training, in learning, regardless of the audiences that you serve now and the audiences that you aspire to serve tomorrow. Like we are the people that are going to help humanity turn this corner and really be able to adapt to these significant changes that are coming. Michael, I would agree that a lot of people don't have any visibility into, don't understand the implications, and won't see this coming. And we're going to be okay, but it's going to get a little crazy. It's going to get a little crazy while we figure out how to bring this, how to do it. A transition. It's going to be a transition.
I guess that a question that I always have in discussions about AI is because I have to say that I am relatively resistant to any discussions about AI being a narrative of constant progress, because especially when it comes to concepts such as machine learning, where we can't really predict in what way a certain kind of technology that can develop itself is going to develop. So I'm just thinking of like Amazon. There was this recent, I don't want to call it so much a scandal, but this recent article that started disseminating over the web about Amazon's AI recruiting tool being biased in how it was recruiting employees, and that it was following trends that it had learned as being inherently masculine and keeping women out of the recruitment. And so I'm wondering, what measures are being currently taken to ensure that AI does not progress beyond what measures are being taken to ensure that in the same way that human intelligence is monitored through such things as sensitivity training, what kind of measures are taken to make sure that AI is monitored in such a way as well?
It's a great question and a big concern. And here's the challenge with it, and that is, AI in and of itself. So if we take just for a moment and take what you're saying off, part of what you were just asking off the table for a moment, just table it. And that is this piece about, AI gaining consciousness and kind of, potentially going off with a mind of its own, right? Because that is, what happens when that happens. Because that probably, there's a lot that's suggesting that is potentially going to happen, and even sooner than we think. So before we think of AI as being the overlords that are going to come and get us, let's talk about bias. And what's happening with subjectivity and bias and people getting hurt with this technology right now. And what's happening is it's not inherent to the tool. The problem with artificial intelligence and bias is it's amplifying what the humans were already doing in the first place. And the problem is it's doing it with velocity, which means that it's doing it with speed and with scale. And that's a problem. It absolutely is a problem. So on the one hand, we can look at something like the Amazon situation and be like, well, that's terrible. Well, okay, first of all, they've been doing it. I mean, that was whether they were conscious of it or not, right? They were excluding people, and it was, yeah, because that whole study was on the use of assertive language, right? And it was actually scanning for, in being able to do its content analysis, it was scanning people's resumes and experience and stuff like that for assertive language that it was fed as part of the training data. And we'll talk about more about that in a moment. But so we can look at it on the one hand and be like, wow, that's horrible. Or we can look at it like, hey, wait a minute, that was the thing that suddenly took what was invisible at Amazon and made it visible. Because what I've been able to tell from the news story so far is they didn't even know that they had that kind of bias baked into the recruiting system. Like that wasn't somebody like, Mr. Burns mastermind, like, we're gonna take out, these, we're gonna marginalize these populations. Like that was just something that they were doing that the humans had built into the human process, and the technology brought it to light. So we're going to go through a lot of that pain because we're going to wind up amplifying, it's like the whole thing that Microsoft did when they tried to set that one AI bot loose on Twitter, and people said a lot of like really bad and nasty things to it. So it learned how to be really bad and nasty and became like a Nazi white supremacist, whatever. Like that was terrible. But again, that wasn't the technology. And we learned the perils of this kind of technology amplifying the worst in us as a species. So we can leverage these tools to bring out the best in humanity, and we can be the generation on this planet that can solve poverty, that can provide democratized education, that can bring people together, that can make us all learn how to be global citizens and figure out that this is one planet and one world, no matter how many, if we're going to Mars, going to Venus or whatever, that still doesn't mean we can tear things up down here and then float off in outer space and go tear things up on another planetary body. Like, I mean, we can be the generation using these tools in order to learn how to be together as global citizens. That's my aspiration. That's what it is that I'm hoping for, that, the goals that the UN has stated now of these things that we're going to come together as a civilization and do together as humanity, that really is, that really is our aim. But in order to get there, we've got to address some of the more base and vile and violent and hostile situations that are happening that we as humans have, dealt with tribalism and with greed and with a focus on, the individual rather than on the greater good. There are just some things about our own nature that we've got to be able to address and make sure that it's not baked into the system. I mean, do you get the impression that anybody's doing it deliberately yet? Have you heard of any of these news stories where you feel like the AI entity was trained in order to?
It's not so much. It's not so much my concern about AI being trained to be a certain way. It's more about how, because as you mentioned, the growth being exponential, our understanding of ourselves and what we're putting into it is not growing exponentially. If anything, I say that in this current climate, it's slowing down almost. That's how I'm perceiving it. So for technology to be growing exponentially when our own understanding of how we're designing it is not growing, I see concern there, because we might end up creating tools that, like, as you say, amplify the worst in ourselves. And I hate to be that kind of a downer, but I think that cautionary discussions are of the utmost importance in this kind of a climate, especially when talking about this kind of stuff.
So do you think those discussions aren't happening?
I wish they were happening more, like to a greater extent. Because I personally don't see them happening as much as I'd like to see them.
At what level?
So like at the level of these tools being designed, because we see them being implemented in various respects, but then not, the discussion is always of progress and not of how it might potentially not work, and what are we preparing as a contingency plan in the event that it does not work as intended.
No, it's not too big. So part of it is, I think, no, it's all valid concerns. But let's talk about the way that the technology gets that bias in the first place, and then also have a little bit of a conversation around some of the resources that are out there, because there are watchdog groups that are very influential, that have been very, very active in this for a while and have quite a lot of clout. So when we talk about AI, we're talking about a tool that, regardless of the size and scale and the application of it, it goes through the same process, right? So we take this vanilla version of AI, an AI platform, and that could be, just some of the commercial ones that are available now. So it could be IBM Watson, or it could be the Amazon AWS platform, or it could be Microsoft Azure, or it could be Google and DeepMind. It could be, but we could take a vanilla instance and it knows nothing. So when you start out with the technology, it's not intended for anything. It's a blank slate. So that technology exists as a platform, and then what happens is we literally train it with data. And that's literally what the term is called, right? So we take a huge data set and we feed it into the AI, and we go, okay, AI, we want you to be an autonomous car, self-driving car, or we want you to be, a learning solution that provides coaching to salespeople, or we want you to be, whatever it is that we want that narrow focus of that instance of that AI technology to be. And then in order for us to shape it, we as humans, into that, we literally train it by feeding it data. And that data, garbage in is garbage out. So that's what happened at Amazon. When they taught it to be a recruiter, they fed it training data, that when they fed it the training data, it turned out that training data was riddled with these biases. And, and again, I don't even think they knew. So now we feed it the training data, and then basically you then go ahead and you can go through steps of testing the AI after it's been trained on the data. But by giving it the data that you've given it, you've trained it in a certain image. So we've set whatever bias was in the data is now in the AI. And now when we go ahead and we go to test it, that's when you wind up getting that, you wind up seeing those conflicts coming out, because you're giving it testing sets, which is different data, and it's having a reaction to the new data that you're, cycling through it. And then that's where it is that we can make some tweaks and then assess the model. But it's not programming per se, it's the data that we're using to scale these things up. And then with machine learning, the more data that it ingests over time, that all becomes part of its learning process. And then again, any of the ongoing data that has any bias in it that could either reinforce or downplay the bias, that's what's going to happen over the long term, because it's ingesting it. And that's the piece that we have to be diligent about, is what is inherent, what are the biases that are inherent, or what are the things in the original training data set that we want to make sure are not present or minimized, or have an understanding that in going through that first cycle of the training data in the AI entity, that we're going to discover things like that, and then we're going to need to, as people, be able to address it before it is that we operationalize and scale that entity out there. And so that piece, right, that milestone at that point before it gets out into the world to go and do whatever its intended use is, that's where we've got, organizations like MIT that have been working on ethical dilemmas in AI for a long time. They've got a whole institute on as we have autonomous cars and the car has to make a choice, right? If it's going to have an accident, does it hit the elderly person, or does it hit the mother pushing the baby in the stroller, right? Like, what if something's going to happen and it's got to make a split-second decision, which is the ethical choice to make? And who gets to feed it the data that drives it literally in either one of those scenarios, which are terrible scenarios. But to your point, we got to figure that kind of stuff out. We have to make those types of decisions. So we've got MIT as one entity that's really been involved. And I shared on Twitter actually earlier today, in Oxford, in England, they've got a whole legal framework and governance, so not just the application and who's responsible if the AI goes badly and causes harm to humans, but who has access and what applications are allowed, and any number of things. But there are measures that are being put into place. We just need to be as concerned citizens as we find heart and passion for that. How can we individually and collectively get involved with some of those governance vehicles to make sure that we have a voice in shaping it, right? So that it's not just it's not just the regulatory authorities don't become just representative of one population, because you're right, they're going to then create AI in their image as we do all things. Is that helpful?
Yes, absolutely. It's a huge topic, and I appreciate you taking the time to answer that. But yeah, I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on it.
Yeah, thank you. And a last bit on that, though, just even thinking about AI applied to education, or AI applied to learning, or AI applied to training, it's easier than we think to introduce that kind of bias, right? So how are we, and have an open-mindedness as you start going through these processes and playing with some of these tools yourself, that you may find, actually chances are probably pretty good, that we're all going to find as we start going through these processes that there may be something in our practice that was marginalizing or penalizing particular types of people based on criteria that we weren't even aware of. But the technology is gonna bring that to the surface. And then, we can make a decision now when that happens to us, how are we going to react? How are we going to respond?
Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. That was really amazing. Thank you for your time, for your answers. We're not going to take more of your time. So, thank you so much.
If I can be helpful, let me know. Twitter's a great way to find me, or find me on LinkedIn.